Welcome back to the channel, and today's story is one that has shaken the Middle East once again. Saudi Arabia has sent out a strong and clear warning to Israel, saying, "Do not cross red lines in Gaza." This statement comes at a time when the war in Gaza has already left thousands of people dead, countless injured, and an entire region sitting on the edge of instability. The Saudi message is being seen not just as a diplomatic gesture, but as a serious regional warning that if Israel pushes further, the consequences may spiral far beyond Gaza and into a wider Middle East conflict. The warning itself is significant because Saudi Arabia has been carefully balancing its foreign policy. On one hand, it has been engaging with the United States and the West with talks in the past about normalization with Israel. On the other hand, the kingdom has deep commitments to the Palestinian cause and has to answer to its own people and the wider Muslim world. When Saudi Arabia tells Israel not to cross red lines, it is sending a clear message that the ongoing military campaign is not just a local matter, but one that threatens the stability of the entire region. Observers point out that Saudi Arabia has rarely issued warnings in such blunt terms. The words red lines are often reserved for situations that a country simply cannot allow to be crossed. In this case, it is believed that Riyadh's concern centers on three major areas. First, the escalating civilian casualties in Gaza. Second, the possibility of Israel expanding operations further south or targeting areas like Rafah where civilians are concentrated. And third, the risk of the conflict spilling into neighboring countries such as Lebanon, Syria, or even triggering a direct confrontation with Iranian-backed groups. In recent days, Saudi diplomats have been active in Arab League meetings and behind the scenes talks. Reports suggest that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has personally been in touch with other regional leaders to coordinate a collective response if Israel ignores the warning. The Saudis are fully aware that their words will also be heard in Washington, London, and Brussels. By taking this firm stance, Riyadh is reminding its allies that its red lines matter and that ignoring them may come at a cost in terms of regional stability and even energy cooperation. The timing of the warning is also important. Israel has intensified its military operations in Gaza with airstrikes, artillery shelling, and a buildup of ground forces. Images emerging from the enclave show widespread destruction of residential areas, hospitals overwhelmed with casualties, and families desperately searching for safety. International humanitarian agencies are warning of an impending catastrophe with food, water, and medical supplies running dangerously low. Against this backdrop, the Saudi message is meant to act as a pressure point, telling Israel that the Arab world is watching and that there are limits to what can be tolerated. Analysts believe that Saudi Arabia is also carefully managing its public opinion. The kingdom's citizens, like much of the Arab and Muslim world, have been watching the Gaza war with anger and sorrow. Social media in Saudi Arabia has been flooded with videos, images, and hashtags condemning Israeli actions and calling for stronger government intervention. If the Saudi leadership is seen as being too passive, it risks angering its own population and losing credibility in the wider region. By issuing a red line warning, Riyadh positions itself as both a protector of the Palestinian cause and a regional power willing to stand up to Israel's actions. The international reaction to the Saudi warning has been mixed. Some Western capitals see it as a necessary message to rein in Israel and prevent the war from spiraling further. Others worry that it could escalate tensions by emboldening other actors such as Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen, who may take Saudi words as a signal to launch attacks of their own. But diplomats familiar with Riyadh's strategy insist that the Saudis are trying to prevent escalation, not provoke it. Their goal is to draw a clear line that if Israel crosses, the consequences will go beyond diplomatic protests. One of the scenarios being discussed is that if Israel continues with heavy bombardment and ground offensives in areas filled with civilians, Saudi Arabia and its allies could move to cut off diplomatic channels, downgrade relations, or even use oil leverage to pressure Western nations backing Israel. Historically, the use of oil as a political weapon has been rare since the 1970s, but experts argue that in a worst-case scenario, Saudi Arabia could decide to use its energy influence to shift the balance of pressure. Meanwhile, inside Gaza, the situation continues to deteriorate. Hospitals are operating at double or triple their capacity. Families have been forced to live in makeshift shelters, schools, or even in the streets. The power supply has been almost entirely cut off, leaving people dependent on small generators. Aid convoys struggle to enter the enclave due to Israeli restrictions and ongoing bombardment. Each day brings new reports of casualties, and the population lives under constant fear of where the next strike will fall. The Saudi red line warning is deeply connected to this humanitarian crisis. For Riyadh, allowing Israel to continue unchecked risks alienating not just Palestinians, but also the entire Arab and Muslim community who look to Saudi Arabia as a guardian of Islamic values. It is also worth noting that Saudi Arabia's stance could reshape its relations with the United States. Washington has been Israel's closest ally and has repeatedly defended its right to respond militarily. But at the same time, U.S. officials are worried about the humanitarian toll and the risk of regional war. If Saudi Arabia takes a harder line, the U.S. may find itself under greater pressure to restrain Israel. This could complicate American foreign policy in the Middle East at a time when Washington is already trying to manage conflicts in Ukraine and maintain influence in Asia. The wider Arab world has largely rallied around the Palestinian cause, with protests in Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, and even in Western cities. The Saudi voice, however, carries particular weight because of its position as the largest economy in the Arab world, the custodian of the two holy mosques, and a leader in global energy markets. When Saudi Arabia says do not cross red lines, it is not just another statement, but a potential turning point in the diplomatic dynamics of the conflict. Behind closed doors, there are concerns that if Israel ignores the Saudi warning, the next step could involve more active measures. These might include convening an emergency Arab League summit, pushing for stronger resolutions at the United Nations, or coordinating with countries like Turkey, Qatar, and Iran to increase pressure on Israel. While Saudi Arabia and Iran have historically been rivals, their recent diplomatic rapprochement means they could find common ground on the Palestinian issue. A united front from Riyadh and Tehran, even if limited to statements and diplomacy, would mark a major shift in Middle Eastern politics. For Israel, the Saudi warning adds another layer of pressure. The Israeli leadership has been focused on eliminating Hamas's military capabilities and reasserting control. But at the same time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces growing international criticism for the scale of civilian casualties. If Israel chooses to ignore Saudi Arabia, it risks pushing one of the most influential Arab states into a more confrontational stance. The humanitarian aspect cannot be overstated. Each new strike in Gaza brings tragic stories of families wiped out, children buried under rubble, and communities destroyed. International aid workers describe the scenes as beyond anything they have witnessed before. The Saudi statement about red lines is not only political, but also humanitarian in its intent, meant to stop the bloodshed before it reaches irreversible levels. The question now is whether Israel will take the warning seriously. History shows that Israeli leaders do not always bend to external pressure, especially when they believe their security is at stake. However, the situation is different this time because the conflict threatens to widen into a regional war. Already, Hezbollah has exchanged fire with Israel along the northern border, and there have been reports of drone and missile attacks from Yemen. If the conflict spreads, it could drag in multiple countries, destabilize oil markets, and create a security nightmare for global powers. Saudi Arabia's decision to draw red lines is therefore both a warning and a plea. A warning to Israel not to push further into Gaza, and a plea to the international community to step in and prevent catastrophe. The coming days and weeks will reveal whether this warning has the desired effect or whether the region edges closer to a new and dangerous phase. To fully understand why Saudi Arabia's words matter so much, it is important to look at history. Since the establishment of Israel in 1948, Saudi Arabia has been one of the strongest supporters of the Palestinian cause. During the wars of 1948, 1967, and 1973, the kingdom provided both financial and diplomatic support to Arab states fighting against Israel. While it has never engaged in direct military confrontation, Riyadh has used its oil wealth and political influence to shape the regional narrative. The 1973 oil embargo was perhaps the most famous example, when Arab states, led by Saudi Arabia, cut oil supplies to the West in response to their support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. That move shook the global economy and demonstrated the power Saudi Arabia could wield when it chose to act. In recent decades, however, Saudi policy has been more cautious. The kingdom has focused on economic development, modernizing its society under Vision 2030, and building closer ties with the United States and Europe. At times, it even explored the possibility of normalizing relations with Israel as part of wider US-led initiatives. But every time those discussions advanced, a flare up in Gaza or Jerusalem reminded Riyadh of the deep sensitivities attached to the Palestinian issue. For Saudi Arabia, abandoning Palestine outright has never been an option, both for ideological reasons and for domestic legitimacy. This is why the latest warning is seen as so important. It shows that while Saudi Arabia may have been willing to explore new paths in its foreign policy, there are still red lines that cannot be crossed without provoking a strong reaction. Gaza is one of those red lines. Civilian massacres, attacks on holy sites, or attempts to displace Palestinians are scenarios that Riyadh simply cannot ignore. Some analysts also point out that Saudi Arabia's warning is a message not just to Israel, but also to Iran. By taking a firm stand on Gaza, Riyadh prevents Tehran from monopolizing the Palestinian cause. Iran has long used its support for Hamas and Hezbollah to portray itself as the champion of resistance against Israel. If Saudi Arabia remains silent, it risks losing influence to Iran in the eyes of the Arab street. By drawing red lines, Riyadh asserts itself as a co-leader of the Palestinian struggle and avoids ceding ground to its rival. At the same time, Saudi Arabia must tread carefully. Escalating tensions too far could risk dragging the kingdom into a direct confrontation, something it wants to avoid as it focuses on its domestic reforms and economic diversification. That is why Riyadh's strategy is likely to be one of calibrated pressure. Strong warnings, diplomatic mobilization, and possibly economic leverage are all tools at its disposal. But direct military involvement is unlikely unless Israel crosses the most extreme red lines, such as targeting Islamic holy sites or attempting mass expulsions of Palestinians. Looking ahead, the Saudi warning could shape the next phase of the war in several ways. If Israel takes it seriously, It may slow down or scale back some of its operations in Gaza to avoid further alienating its regional neighbors. If Israel ignores it, then the Arab world may rally together in a way not seen in decades, putting unprecedented diplomatic and economic pressure on Tel Aviv and its Western allies. What is certain is that the war in Gaza has already changed the dynamics of the Middle East. It has exposed the limits of normalization efforts, reignited the Palestinian issue at the center of Arab politics, and forced regional powers to take clearer positions. For Saudi Arabia, this is a defining moment. Its words will be remembered, and its actions in the coming weeks will determine whether it can maintain its role as both a modernizing leader and a protector of Arab and Islamic causes. In the end, the Saudi message reflects a broader truth. The Middle East is interconnected, and no conflict stays local for long. Gaza's suffering is not just Gaza's problem. It is a crisis that resonates across Arab capitals, reverberates in Muslim communities worldwide, and shapes the future of international relations. By telling Israel not to cross red lines, Saudi Arabia is reminding the world that ignoring Gaza means risking the stability of the entire region. And as the situation continues to unfold, one thing is clear: the words spoken in Riyadh will echo far beyond the borders of Saudi Arabia. They will be heard in Tel Aviv, in Washington, in Tehran, and in every corner of the world where people are watching and waiting to see what happens next. The question is whether Israel will listen, or whether the red lines drawn in words will have to be defended by actions.